A couple of months ago, I found myself thinking about how many of us, and I in particular, had gotten into the habit of teaching people a set of concepts. We might call it ministry design. Sometimes we call it outcome-based ministry. Whatever we called it, I started to feel concerned that we were starting halfway through the storyline. We were assuming too much, going too fast, and leaving gaps. It was like whistling a song that sounds crystal clear in your head, but everyone else hears it and has no idea what you're whistling. It's taken a long time of praying and wrestling, of asking myself, if we were starting all over again, if I could go back and talk to myself in 2006, would I approach it differently? In 2006, Rob came into a room and laid out a series of questions, and neither of us had any idea that we'd be wrestling with those questions for the next 20 years. It was one of those emotional moments. He's crying, I'm crying, and the whole thing feels like a raw beginning to what became a long journey. Here we are in 2024, so it's been quite a few years. I wondered, if I could go back to that moment, would I give myself a very different conversation than I gave to the cohort last year in Washington, D.C., in that room? And I came to the uncomfortable conclusion that I absolutely would. I started trying to think about how I could approach this in a fundamentally different way. I'm not even sure if this new way is right, so I don't have a guide for it. This is just going to be our first installment together. We're going to have a conversation, reflect on where it's useful, see what questions still arise, and wrestle with it as we go. So, back in 2006, we realized something very important. We saw that it was possible to be pursuing God's call in your life, whether individually or as a group, to focus on measurable goals and tasks, yet not really focus on the change it was making in the world. What became clear to us in 2006 was that this wasn't only possible, it was absurdly common. It was so common that we saw it in various fields. In education, for instance, teachers might be more passionate about teaching than about what students were actually learning. It became clear that doctors were often more passionate about practicing medicine than about the health of their patients and how well they were truly improving. Everywhere we looked, we saw this gap between what people spent their lives doing and the reason they told themselves they were doing it. It was a profound realization that people weren't actually connecting the dots between activity and impact. So, in 2006, we started playing with new language. We didn't realize it at the time, but we were drawing from sociology as we tried to articulate what we were observing. We started saying things like, not every output is an outcome. We realized that not every measure of activity corresponds to real, transformational change. Just because people are coming to church and you count them doesn't mean that every person there experienced a changed life. This was a tough realization for all of us. Rob was wrestling with it, I was wrestling with it, and it led us to see several things more clearly. Now, after nearly 20 years of thinking and reflecting, here's the first thing I'd like to say about it. I really love the content in this program. This presentation will give you a solid framework for understanding the program and why it's designed this way. The program is set up to include 2 sessions, this one, then a break, and then one last session. You know, whenever God starts speaking to you, it feels like a megaphone in your ear. And when others don't hear it as loudly, you want to shake them and say, "Don't you hear God speaking with a megaphone?" It's as if God is calling you to repentance, and you're passionate to make others see it too. So everywhere we went, it felt like a prophetic moment, this burning sense of urgency. Outputs aren't outcomes. We became passionate about wrestling with questions of ultimate purpose, real impact, and meaningful measures. We wanted to make sure that we weren't fooling ourselves with flashy or empty metrics, but instead were looking for real substance and fruit from our efforts. When you're early on in this journey, you can get overly aggressive. I know for a fact that I did. Now, after 20 years, here's what I want to say. We're all made in the image of God, each one of us. God has given us a vocation, a calling, and a set of gifts. He has given you strengths, passions, and a sensitivity to certain parts of the world. When you live out that calling, when you're working in the classical sense of vocation, not just a career, but a deep sense of purpose, you come fully alive. You're so fully alive that it can be striking, even to sociologists who might call this flow. You lose all sense of time because you're so engaged. But here's the hard part that I want to share. This feeling of flow, this alignment with vocation, is a gift from God, but it's different from mission. Let me lay out the argument, and then we can discuss it later if needed. When you're working in your calling, doing what makes you come alive, creating art, singing, dancing, playing sports, whatever it may be, that is beautiful. No one has to convince you to do it, and it doesn't need justification. It's a gift from God to you. But mission is different. Mission is an effort to achieve measurable impact or change in the world. Just because you're hardwired to do something and feel joy in it doesn't make it your mission. That's your calling, and while it doesn't need defending, we need to be clear that it's distinct from mission. Mission is about creating a difference in the world. It's about building, healing, reforming, developing, and driving change. Mission requires this outward focus, something that goes beyond ourselves, something that can even judge our efforts. For missional leaders, this can be tough. The people you lead may want more of the calling-focused activities, the parts that are joyful and fulfilling, while you're focused on achieving impact. That gap between what they want and what you're trying to accomplish is challenging to bridge. So, over the years, we've developed what we call outcome-based ministry because we needed a term for this type of focus. God was stirring something in us that said, just because you're excited about doing it doesn't mean it's working. You have to bear fruit, and you will ultimately be evaluated by God based on the evidence of what is produced from the mission He gives you. In outcome-based ministry, the goal of mission is achievable impact. I believe that 100%, even though it's a contentious claim. The goal of mission is measurable change that is missionally aligned, positive, and transformative. To those who say that passion for vocation is the same as mission, I say it's not. Vocation brings you alive and fills you with joy, but mission is about making a tangible difference. And if we don't have a way to measure that change, then we're just living out our calling, not mission. So, let's wrestle with this. Over the past 20 years, we've observed three main sources of impact: the organization, the missional community, and the programs and strategies. Each of these elements is interconnected. You can have an amazing program that donors love and that raises lots of money, but if it's not achieving what you set out to do, then you have a problem. These are real challenges, and they're the kinds of things that we rarely talk about openly. But as you build a ministry, you'll go through times when you need to strengthen your organization, engage more deeply with your missional community, or refine your programs and strategies. Ministry is complex, and each decision impacts these areas in some way. The pursuit of outcome-based ministry, then, is a pursuit of integrity, health, and substance, the real deal. Life is complex, and ministry is no exception. We tell ourselves stories that make ministry sound simple, but like any other field, it requires a level of intentionality and accountability. Ministry design takes work, and if we claim the word mission, we must be serious about pursuing it, aligning our actions with measurable change in the world. So, as missional leaders, we must wrestle with this distinction. We need to ask ourselves, what change are we truly creating? Mission can't just be about personal fulfillment or a sense of calling. It has to be measured by the change it creates in others. When we organize our work around outcome-based ministry, we're pursuing something real, grounded in both purpose and evidence of impact. We're not just satisfied by feeling good about what we're doing, but are driven to see tangible, lasting results. We often frame sources of impact through three main components: the organization, the missional community, and the programs or strategies. Each of these elements plays a vital role in achieving measurable impact, but each requires focused attention. Programs and strategies, for example, may seem like the core of what we do, but they're just one part of the picture. Over time, we began to realize that we also needed to give real focus to strengthening our organization and engaging with our missional community, not just refining our programs. Here's an analogy. Imagine that you have an incredible program that is well-funded and popular, but later you find out that it's not actually creating the outcomes you expected. What do you do then? You're left with a dilemma, because you've invested resources and built relationships around this program. But if you find that it's not creating real change, you're faced with a theological problem. If we're in the business of mission, failure is not an option. It challenges our faith, our stewardship, and our accountability to God and others. These are the challenges that many ministries face, though they're rarely discussed openly. In our experience, we realized that we needed to approach ministry design as a holistic, interconnected pursuit. Sometimes this meant putting focused energy on building capacity within the organization, other times on strengthening the missional community, and sometimes on refining the programs and strategies themselves. We came to see ministry impact as a set of interconnected goals that required continual balancing and refining. Here's a practical exercise I encourage you to try. In your own ministry, think about those 3 areas: organization, missional community, and programs and strategies. Rank them in terms of strength. Which is your strongest? Which is your weakest? Which one has the most room for growth? Be honest. If I were to spend 2 weeks with you in your ministry, I could help identify which area might be an Achilles heel or a hidden strength. For instance, maybe your organization is solid and well-structured, but you're struggling with engaging your missional community effectively. Let's break down each of these areas. Your missional community includes people within your ministry network, such as members, volunteers, partners, donors, and even your staff. Each of these groups plays a role in how you fulfill your mission. Do you have an intentional value proposition for each segment of your missional community? Have you thought about their journey in relation to your mission, from initial engagement to long-term involvement? Each person in your community needs a clear sense of why they're part of the work you're doing. Now let's talk about programs and strategies. Examples from various fields can help us think outside of our usual context. Whether you're working on a marketing campaign, apprenticeship, consulting, or training, the strategies you adopt should align with your mission and goals. These strategies are vehicles for change, but they must be adaptable and based on evidence to remain effective. Think about your organization as a whole. Within your organizational center, do you have clear control over mission, vision, leadership, and culture? These core areas cannot be outsourced. They're the responsibility of the organizational center. If these are weak, it doesn't matter how strong your programs or missional community might be. You'll have challenges aligning everything toward the mission. Consider that each of these areas, organization, missional community, and programs, has 4 key dimensions: capacity, scalability, sustainability, and outcomes. As you pursue impact, these dimensions help determine how effectively your ministry can achieve lasting, transformative change. Capacity is about having the resources and ability to carry out your work. Scalability is about how far you can extend your reach. Sustainability is about maintaining your mission over the long term. And outcomes are the measurable results of your efforts. For example, let's say your organization has built a highly effective program. You may find that while it's strong in outcomes, it's limited in scalability due to resources. Or you may have a great organizational culture, but if it isn't sustainable financially, it's at risk over time. Each decision you make affects these dimensions, which in turn affects your overall impact. So let's talk about missional community formation, another aspect that often requires attention. For a long time, we focused heavily on programs and strategies and realized later that we were overlooking our missional community. We have about 100,000 churches and several 100,000 volunteers around the world, and connecting with each one is a monumental task. Before 2009, we didn't have digital means to reach everyone, and it felt impossible to build strong relationships with such a vast network. But as technology advanced, we suddenly had the means to engage, and we realized how crucial missional community formation was for creating lasting impact. If you're leading a ministry, your missional community formation process should include intentional steps for building relationships, supporting development, and ensuring alignment with your mission. Without a strong missional community, your impact will be limited, no matter how strong your programs or organizational structure may be. Similarly, your programs and strategies should be designed with clear theories of change, assessment, and iteration. You need to know what outcomes you're aiming for, and you need mechanisms for evaluating and improving your approach. Ministry is a complex endeavor, and it requires us to pay attention to every level, from the theories that guide our actions to the strategies we implement and the people we serve. Here's a real-world example that illustrates the complexity of ministry. Years ago, my wife and I owned a small share in a boat. On the 4th of July, we took family and friends out on the Atlantic to watch the fireworks from the water, and it was one of the most beautiful experiences we've ever had. But as it got later, we noticed that the water around us was filling up with more and more boats, all trying to return to shore through a narrow channel. Suddenly, I found myself navigating through a sea of boats, all of us drifting in the wind and waves, with kids running around the deck and people everywhere. I was terrified, having to monitor every movement, adjusting to the forces pushing us while staying aware of each boat around us. It felt like trying to steer through a sea of complexity, with every movement requiring my full attention. In many ways, ministry feels the same. There are so many variables to consider, and each small decision affects the others. Ministry isn't a simple, straightforward road. It's more like navigating through a complex, ever-moving channel. When we step into ministry with a sense of mission, we're called to build a missional community, strengthen our organization, and develop effective programs. But to claim the word mission, we have to take seriously what's happening in the world around us, not just in ourselves. We have to be committed to creating real change, and that requires paying attention to outcomes beyond our personal satisfaction. In ministry, it's all too easy to feel accomplished simply because we're busy doing things that align with our calling. But if we want to truly impact the world, we need to focus on the other, the people we're serving. Mission is motivated by love, and love is motivated by the other, not by ourselves. If we're too focused on our own fulfillment, we risk losing sight of the very purpose of mission. So here's my challenge. If you're pursuing a calling, that's wonderful, but don't ask others to lay down their lives for your vocation. Invite them to lay down their lives for a mission that is focused on measurable, achievable impact. Take on the burden of leadership by committing to real change, one that reaches beyond personal fulfillment to create something meaningful in the lives of others. In doing so, we honor God and we hold ourselves accountable to the work we set out to accomplish. As leaders pursuing outcome-based ministry, we have to take an honest look at the various components of our work. Each part, organization, missional community, and programs or strategies, contributes to the whole, but none of them can stand alone. Without a healthy organization, our structure falls apart. Without a well-connected missional community, we lose our reach and impact. And without strong, effective programs, our efforts lack the mechanisms to create real change. Together, these form a cohesive system for meaningful ministry.